All right, so this video is going to go over the Unit 2 Day 5 homework. I will make another video in a few minutes that will go over the Unit 5 Day 3 warm-up. There will not be a video going over the Unit 5 Quiz 1 review or the Unit 5 Quiz 1 review on ClassKick, which is homework. The ClassKick review is your homework. We will go over both the review and the ClassKick review next class. Because I am not here today, what I want you to do is submit, once you complete it, submit the Unit 5 Quiz 1 review that's posted on Schoology. Please submit that on Schoology so that I know you completed it. Okay, let's go over the Unit 5 Day 2 homework. First question asks us to write a congruent statement for these polygons, right? We clearly see that they are triangles. What I want to do is I have to match up those points. I have to match up the vertices of each of these triangles. So I can start with A. Let's just start with A. A couple things that I can do to identify which letter over here is going to correspond with A. Well, A is formed by, well, let's see, the side with 1 mark and the side with 2 marks. Side with 1 mark and the side with 2 marks. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to look at the angle. Well, that has 1, 2, 3 marks. 1, 2, 3 marks. That's got to be B. So I know that A, triangle A, that's going to end up corresponding with D. All right, I'll have my congruence in there, right? And then I can figure everything else out. How about B? Let's just go down to B. B is the angle with 2 marks. E is the angle with 2 marks. Sorry, not E. B and E. And then the last one obviously has to be C and F, but if you don't see it, it's the one angle that has 1 mark. Now, I know that Big Ideas wanted you to put specifically triangle EFD, which is right here, because it guided you. B, C, A. B corresponds with E, C corresponds with F, A corresponds with D. But you got to figure out which points correspond with what first. Identify the pairs of the corresponding parts, the congruent corresponding parts. Well, with these letters, right, whatever they matched up with, so A and D, B and E, C and F, those are going to be the angles that correspond, right? So angle A, angle D, angle B, and angle E, and angle C, angle F. The corresponding sides. With this, we don't really need to know anything about their congruent statements or anything about their congruent angles. They're marked A, B, D, E, B, C, E, F, A, C, D, F, right? They're all marked telling us that. But if we were not given that picture, right, we just have to look at, let's see, well, BC, that's the first 2 letters. EF is the first 2 letters. CA is the last 2 letters. FD is the last 2 letters. FD, well, that's not an option down here. FD is the same thing as DF. Right, that's our symmetric property, just flipping that over on its head. And then for the last one, if we wanted to figure out, well, that's the first letter and the last letter, first letter and the last letter. A, B, D, E. And again, that's all stuff that we talked about last class. Moving on here. Very, very similar. Okay, match up all the angles. Well, let's start with H. Where's H? H is the angle with 2 marks. R is the angle with 2 marks. Then we go to J. J's got 4. S has 4. K has 3, right? So on and so forth. You just continue. all those angles, right? We already identified them. Those are the angles that are going to match up. HR, JS, KT, GQ. And the corresponding sides, right, if I'm looking at, I don't know why it starts with GH, but I guess we'll just start with GH. Last letter, first letter. GH must correspond with QR. Right, and then we just continue down the line with that. Or we don't even need to do that. You have the name, or sorry, you have the picture. Picture tells us, well, let's see, GK, TQ, KJ, and ST, or TS, right, so on and so forth. In the figure, triangle XYZ is congruent to triangle MNL. Find the measure of angle Y. Right away, before I even look at the picture, find the measure of angle Y. Think about what Y is going to correspond with. Y is the second letter, N is the second letter. So we have to correspond with M. We have to be congruent to N. Angle Y, angle N is already 124, so angle Y also has to be 124. And that's just from looking at the name, figuring out what order those letters are in, and solving it that way. Okay, continuing. In the figure, triangle XYZ is congruent to triangle MNL. Find the measure of angle M. Well, in order to find the measure of angle M is the first letter, corresponds with X. We don't know what M is, but we do know that X is 33. Measure of angle M must also be 33. For this, we have to solve for X and Y. And I know this might seem like a trickier problem because we're not just dealing with a triangle, but don't let it become a trickier problem. We're still just dealing with congruence. Find the values of X and Y given that ABCD is congruent to EFGH. ABCD, EFGH. What I want to do first is I want to identify X or Y, right? You get to pick one or the other. Here's my X. X is a part of 10x plus 65, which is angle F. Well, what's going to correspond with angle F? Angle F is the second letter, B is the second letter, so I know that it's going to have to correspond with angle B. I can now find Y. Y is a part of 4y minus 4. That's angle E. What corresponds with E? E is the first letter, A is the first letter, E and A. And I know that A is 28. So just setting these up for you, right? Not solving. I believe you get 7 and 8 or something like that. But if I was just setting this up, right? A is congruent to E. And those angles are, sorry. Angle A is congruent to angle E. Angle B is congruent to angle F. They're both the second letter. And then we can solve with substitution. Find the values of X and Y given that triangle MNP is congruent to triangle TUS. Well, let's see. First, I just want to identify my X. I have a 2x minus 50, which is a part of angle U, but I also have 2x minus y over here. So I have X in two different places. I'm going to set this up the same exact way that I set up the last one. I'm going to go piece by piece. I'm going to set up my X, I'm going to set up my Y, and then I'm going to see what I need to solve for first. Right? And by the way, that 2x minus y is a part of segment NP. And that's also the only place where I see y. So let's see, we had angle U over here, which was 2x minus 50. Angle U, which is the second letter, is going to correspond with angle N, which is that angle up there. We'll see what that looks like in a second, but what I want you to think about is, what is that angle? Can you very easily find the measure of that angle? Pause the video and see if you can remember how to find the measure of that angle. (142, 24, angle N. We know that those three angles have to add up to 180. And just setting up from there, right, I know that angle has to be 14. Angle N is 14 degrees. That's going to be equal to angle U, which is 2x minus 50. That will allow us to solve for x. Looking down here, right, we had NP, which was 2x minus y. What does NP correspond with? US, which is 13. 2x minus y is equal to 13. Now, if you saw the two variables in this one and you were confused on what you need to solve for first, well, up here you're going to get an x value. You're going to get an answer for x. Once you get that x, you can substitute and use it right there. Naming more congruent things, right? Corresponding parts, naming all the angles, naming all of the sides as well. Identify the name of the property that the statement illustrates. So remember we talked about this in class. This is the symmetric property. The symmetric property tells us this. If I have something x and it's equal to something y, or it's, we'll just say congruent, that also means that y is congruent to x. That's what the symmetric property looks like. The transitive property is a little different. The transitive property tells us this. Or sorry, let me just start with the reflexive property. If you had something x and it was congruent to itself, that's what the reflexive property is. That's all that it says. Right, which is not the case. We have two different triangles here. The transitive property tells us this. If I have something x that's congruent to y, and you have y that's congruent to something else, we'll say z, then we can kind of, like I said in class, cut out the middleman and say that x is congruent to z. That's the transitive property. So if you want to think about it this way, right, maybe this will help. The reflexive property deals with one triangle and it's congruent to itself. The symmetric property deals with two triangles and they are congruent to each other, no matter which way we write it. The transitive property deals with three triangles or just figures. It doesn't have to be triangles. It could be any geometric figure. The transitive property, we're dealing with three things. They're all congruent to one another. Find the measure of angle 1. I'm actually going to take this off real quick just to kind of take you through the process here. Well, the problem doesn't really give me that much. These are congruent, right? And I know that because I have the 90-degree angle here. And I have that this angle is congruent to that angle. Some of you might be thinking, well, how did I know that they were congruent? They actually have the same marking. I know it's kind of a little hard to see, but they have that red mark right there. That tells us that that angle is congruent to that angle. So angle L congruent to angle Z, and I know that angle Z has to be 70 degrees. And we wanted to find the measure of angle 1. Think about what those three angles should add up to. Angle 1 plus 70 plus 90. What would that have to get me? Well, that's day 1, right? 180 degrees. You just solve for angle 1. Describe and correct the error, right? Hopefully you were able to write a little bit here so I can kind of see what you were thinking, but taking my work off of this. Whoops, that did not work. Right away I'm given that triangle QRS is congruent to triangle XYZ. The first statement right here says that angle S is congruent to angle Z. Let's see if that's true. There's angle S, but there's angle Z. Right? They are not congruent to each other. If they were, they would match up in those names, right? If angle S and angle Z were truly congruent, then instead of having it written like this, we would have to have triangle XYZ, because then they would both be the third letter. But that's not the case, right? What this problem is telling us is that angle Q is congruent to angle X, which makes sense. They're both 90 degrees. Angle R is congruent to angle Z, and angle S is congruent to angle Y. Right, so they just rotated the triangle or reflected it. Okay, that was the homework. I really hope that if you had questions, right, you had asked me previously. If not, I hope that this answered your questions. If it didn't, please jot your questions down somewhere and send me an email. That's going to end this video. What I want you to do next is I want you to do the Unit 5, Day 3 warm-up. There will be a video key for that as well, but I want you to give it a try first. See you there.